On this episode of the Cash Compound Podcast, we've got a very special guest all the way across the country from Arizona, a Nelson Nash practitioner himself, Mr. David Zapata. Join us. Yes. Okay. So David Zapata in the building. Thank you so much for joining. We have got a lot of things to cover. And the reason for that is, man, because I think you have a great story that you need to be sharing with our audience. And we need to be collaborating more and more often in the space of this infinite banking idea, what we call the save and spend system. So without further ado on me rambling, let's let the folks hear from you a little bit. And would you introduce yourself as a practitioner, small p, a person who does the infinite banking concept himself? I believe that's true about you. They're private contracts, so I don't know for sure, but I bet you can prove that you're really doing it. A big P practitioner, because we're also in the brotherhood of the Nelson Nash Institute environment. We're members, we're fellows inside that community. And of course, you're leading the charge over there with a great team at the Factum wealth community. So we love that as well. We know you're traveling across the country doing a lot of things. So that's the best I can do. How would you describe yourself in this space, Mr. David Zapata? Go ahead.
Thank you for having me, brother. It's an honor, a pleasure. Before I share any part of my story, I have to give you a shout out. You and your brother Jonah. I just had the pleasure of seeing you speak at the Nelson Nash Institute. You guys went over there and gave a fantastic presentation that energized the entire room. And I just have to tell you here, so it's recorded forever in history, evergreen, that I admire how much passion, how much truth, how much identity I see you both putting into your work and into the way you serve people. And it lit a fire on me as well. So I thank you for the blessing of sharing your story with me and for having me today in your podcast. A little bit about me. I leave this description. I've changed this so many times, and I used to spend so much time and energy trying to be effective at describing myself. And I will lead with what's true for me. I'm a father of two boys. I'm a husband. I'm a family man. I'm a proud American. I am an immigrant. I was born and raised in Colombia. And I've had the blessing, the fortune. Often I find myself to be the luckiest person in the rooms I'm in, to find people with ideas, with passion that show me that there's more to my life that I can continue to unfold and evolve into, to be able to be of service to other people. And infinite banking just happened to be that call that I got from my little brother one day saying, "Hey, I know you've been researching real estate and ways to build wealth. You should go and talk to this guy and read this little book called Becoming Your Own Banker." That's my little brother, 7 years younger than me. So you probably relate to that. And I am so grateful that I was wise enough not to challenge him, but to just do what he said. And I went and read that book, and I went and met with that practitioner. And the moment I could see this idea, I did not understand what it meant, and I didn't understand it quite well, but I knew there was something I'd never seen before. And I took that feeling and I turned it into an obsession. And I read and read and talked um, until I got clearer and clearer about what Nelson had tried to tell me in all these stories and all these quotes and all these simple sentences that were just too simple for my complicated mind, if I'm honest. So like you said, I am not coming to anyone when I talk about these concepts from the preaching perspective of telling them what to do. I don't like being told what to do. I am sharing what I do myself. The moment I discovered this concept, my wife and I decided to radically change our financial life. We knew that the banking function in our life was manipulated and taken over by other parties. And we fully engaged on the process of changing that, on taking control, being the directors of our own movie. That process started in 2017. And over time, we've built this portfolio between me, my wife, our two boys, grandpa, and dad-in-law. And we continue to do that now for business. And at some point, it became such a clear drive in my life, Jeremiah, that I had a background in engineering. I used to work for the jet engine business. I thought I was going to find success in being an executive in corporate America. And quickly I found out that although It's a very noble and great profession. That was not what my purpose was. And I had the opportunity to decide, well, do I transition into something that is really um, a, a kind of work that feels like play for me? And again, I'm grateful enough that I wasn't stubborn, and instead I listened to what God was trying to put in my heart. And I made the transition into becoming a practitioner. I called Carlos Lara and David Stern and Bob Murphy at the time, and we had an interview. And I was lucky enough to be accepted and welcome into the community that you and I are now fellow practitioners of. And every day, man, I wake up, I think about this, I talk about this, and I stop thinking about it until I go to bed, because it is, I think, in my opinion, if you ask me why I do what I do, in my opinion, is one of those ways in which I can bring meaningful impact to families and business owners in my community to create more abundance, to create more opportunity, to find the way they want to express freedom in their life. And that to me is a worthy way to spend the rest of my life bringing value to other people.
So many great nuggets in there, and I want to break them down and ask questions about some of those, David. So appreciate that introduction. One of those is your background as an engineer. We are talking about finances, which means there are numbers involved in what we do. And I'm talking to folks all the time from the way we communicate this information, and they say, let's talk the numbers. Let's get to the numbers. Let's go to the numbers. Would you consider, if and you're an engineer, I'm more of a speaker, an entertainer, and a marketer. I'm not a numbers guy. How does a numbers guy make sense of this information when I'm over here trying to say, hey, it's a concept. And if you understand the concept, the numbers don't matter. But maybe you have a different opinion about that. So how do you go about that conversation as an engineer brain?
I love it, man. That's a great question. I tell everyone that I start a conversation with to look at the page of the book, the front page of the book, and in the book, the title says "Becoming Your Own Banker." The word "banker" is highlighted in red, capital letters, larger font. And I tell every single person the active word for me in that title is becoming, not banker. Is becoming. And it is not an exception for me that that process was a transition of learning, of being humbled, and realizing that there's not a right or wrong approach. There's a way that I, David, can only communicate to my people in a way that will connect with them so they can catch IBC, not be taught IBC. It has to be something that you personally catch. So um, I had a really interesting experience when we first, as a couple, my wife and I found IBC. I looked at an illustration and I looked at the cash values. And when I saw the growth in cash values, I knew there was an exponential function in there. And I knew that no other place in my life financially, I have exponential functions showing up. And that immediately captured me. When I said that in English to my wife, she looked at me like, "What are you saying? That's great." Right. So,
Right. Exponential function. I'm good. You just took me back to like high school math, and I'm like, oh boy, what
I
does that
know,
mean?
I know. And it was humbling because at that moment, I realized there are unique ways in which my brain works, my spirit works, that I'm going to look at something and that's my perspective. And I used to apologize for that because other people couldn't relate. And now I fully own it. That's how I think about it, if I'm perfectly honest. But my practitioner at the time gave us a great lesson. It gave me a great lesson in humbleness. He switched the conversation and he focused on my wife, Sarah. And he started talking to her and started finding what was important to her and started talking about how her financial decisions were impacting the things that were important to her. And at the time, for us, traveling and having a lot of experiences and building our life through these experiences as a couple, we weren't married yet, was really important. And the moment we put it in those terms, it connected for her. The fact that we were financing these things traditionally with cash or credit, not realizing there was a cost to all these things because we were not the bankers in our life. And I bring that experience because the moment I saw that, I realized if I'm going to do this as a professional, there's a difference between how I personally perceive things and how I am effective at communicating with others to be able to serve them. So I've been in this journey for years now on how do I build a message that relates to my people. I still want people that have the same values alignment with me, but that I can be effective at sharing perspectives that connect with them in their different ways of thinking. So for me, numbers are important. I know at the Institute we talk about a concept ideas, and I think that's exactly how we should lead the conversation. The strategy I use now is a triangle. It's a triangulation of information. I like to explain the concept, the ideas, particularly the problem is the most important thing I've found at the think tank. Constantly, people that have been in the industry for a long time are saying, make sure they understand the problem, because if you don't understand the problem and what the problem is costing you, there's no point in having any of the other conversation. And I agree 100% with that. We understand the idea and the concept, and we can compare that to how it's implemented in real life. So I like sharing examples of how I actually do IBC to finance things in my life, to make it a reality, tangible aspect of things. And then we can also use logic and numbers to understand the mechanics of the process, because there's people, at least in my community, that would like to understand how it works so they can become confident. And going back between these three things is an effective way to give multiple perspectives to a person, because at the end, my objective, and I think that you would relate to this, is I don't want them to be in the business of David being my banker. In the promise I make to clients is, in the next 3 to 5 years, I will still be here, but I want you to feel confident enough in your education that you won't need me. And it will be now a relationship of building things together, not dependency. And that requires a certain level of understanding that we help them grow through. So,
I love that. Very good. So, my next thought would come into that message that you send out to people through your marketing and through your community with the agency that you work alongside, Factum. So, give me a flavor of what Factum is about. How is it different than what I'm doing? Is it the same? And, when our listeners, we're recording here, me and you, but when our listeners out there in our communities hear this information, how do you guys show up in the world in your practice, personally, your book, as we might say, and the Factum kind of structure?
yeah. I love that. And, I actually wouldn't even frame it as differences between you and I, because the more I get to know you and Jonah, the more I see your presentation, the more I see us as brothers aligning the same battlefield, men in the arena, sharing a message. The difference I would only point out has nothing to do with my message of IBC. It has to do with what God put uniquely in Jeremiah that I can have, and what God put in David that only David can express. And the truth is that the more we highlight our commonalities and our strength, the more we'll be together in a community to serve millions of Americans that need this idea in their lives. So I actually see it from an abundance place. I like and love highlighting your strengths, because what I saw again a couple of weeks ago is something that is not part of me, but I know people in my life could benefit from hearing your voice. And I know that would be true for me in your community as well. So I love we're doing this. But when it comes to Factum, Factum is a leadership development company for agents that want to teach their communities the process of infinite banking. That's what it is. We're developing other agents, other people to build businesses where they can effectively teach people how to understand, implement, and forever transfer this to multiple generations as a process, as a lifestyle in their family. We're trying to expand Nelson's legacy to our communities. And the way we accomplish this starts and ends with a very simple idea that has nothing to do with financials and has nothing to do with infinite banking or whole life insurance. It starts with something we call the 5 areas of life. We at Factum believe that an ideal life is a life where you have abundance in all areas of your life. And whether you agree with me or not, we've identified roughly 5 areas that are the most significant. And these areas are defined by the relationships you have with these individuals. At the top, we have your spiritual area of life, your relationship with God, the creator, the universe, however you represent that, with yourself, with your family, with money, financially, and then with what we call your occupation. That to me is how I deliver value to everyone around me. That idea is, if you express abundance in all these areas, you're going to achieve a higher level of expression of life and freedom that is going to impact the world around you. And financially speaking, the relationship with money is important, because money as a purpose, in our view, has the responsibility of funding everything else outside that financial area of life, to have abundance with a relationship with your kids, going to take them to the experiences you want to have, donating as much money as you can for the causes you care about, et cetera, et cetera. That simple idea informs how we show up at work, how we add value to our agents, how we add value to our clients, and how we add value to our community in general. And when people come into our world, Um, I think the first thing they notice is that we are not in the business of selling anything to anyone or convincing anything of anything anyone. We are in the business of educating people, and we are committed to that. So we put an infrastructure around the new members of our community where they're going to get properly educated about whole life insurance, about infinite banking, so they can make decisions on their own. Nelson used to say, once you know what's happening, you'll know what to do. We firmly believe that. So that's our approach to the conversation. And we have, monthly calls with clients for education. We have 2 live events a year that I think you've been part of. We have masterminds with our agents twice a year. So we are building a business where we really focus on developing people as leaders of their family, their business, their community to bring this process and this idea to fruition.
I love the holistic approach that Factum has and that you have personally. It's great to see the folks who are in the leadership or in the influencing community within the Factum family. Because, yes, we did get to go to the 2023 agent event, my brother and I both, and to see you guys talk about this in terms of a holistic approach, the 5 areas. I love it. Now, everybody knows that on our side of the fence, number one, we're going to beg, borrow, and steal things that make sense as we also try to utilize that abundance mentality we hear you guys talk about so much. But we also, because I grew up Baptist, we had to change these things to be alliterated. So we got family and faith and finances and friends and fun and all that stuff. So I just had to change your 5
I
areas
love
just
it.
to F's, because that made
Yes.
sense. But we love that. And we're utilizing that same structure of the 1 to 10 scale. How would you rate yourself on these areas in your life, in your relationships? We're utilizing that with our team. So we appreciate that. That's one thing we've stolen. And another
And
thing,
you haven't
yeah,
stolen. Think about it. That's a God given idea that's always been here, just like what Nelson talked about, and you and I are not expanding on it. So the fact that we have commonalities is what makes
love
our
it.
community stronger. There's not a shortage of people that need what we're talking about.
See, and that's the problem. Every time I talk about beg, borrowing, stealing, and getting out of Factum or any other of our fellow practitioners or community out there who are believing in the same things that we believe in, my friends over here at Factum won't even let me use the word stealing. I'm just trying. They won't even let me use it. And no, 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 it's free out there. Now, speaking of
It's
that,
all yours already.
I've seen you inside the numbers, but not just in the numbers, but utilizing those spreadsheets and those number crunching utilities to create some other tools. So I want to know about some of those things. So you're a whiz at the Excel, the Google Sheets type of work. And one of the things I want you to talk about here is this wealth scorecard. Where did that come from? I love this thing. You let me walk out of there with that. So I'm utilizing what God put in you
Love it.
guys to be able to share that with some clients. And I want you guys to talk about the holistic approach and the wealth scorecard approach specifically that I think you helped implement over there in your Factum
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, I love it, man. And again, I'm so grateful. I mean, honestly, it's a compliment. If the top performers in our industry, like you and Jonah, right? People that we respect from your messaging, your knowledge, the impact you're having in your community, come to one of our masterminds and say, hey, this would be valuable for our community. That's actually a compliment. And when you believe in abundance, there's no competition, brother. We live in a creative plane. We are creating these things again because our objective is to create value that we'll never see. So if it is making it to your community and we're creating value that you that we'll never see, it's a blessing. So the wealth scorecard, that is we're trying to organize these frameworks for our community to be able to orient themselves at like, why is this relevant? One of the biggest problems I see when I sit down with business owners in particular is that they see life insurance, whole life insurance, as a little transaction they'll make with a piece of paper they'll sign. And once they get that certificate of insurability, they'll take that piece of paper, put it inside a drawer in the kitchen with the batteries and the old zip ties and stuff, and they will look at it until mortality faces them. And it's unfortunately because it puts in most people's mindset that life insurance is death insurance. And when I am trying to educate someone, I want to change that perspective. I want to elevate that thinking to say, hey, this is actually something that I interact with at least every month because it's an active part of my life. This is an activity where I store money to thoughtfully decide how I send it out to create cash flow, to finance my life, to bless other people. And that is a process that I never wanted to stop on my 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I wanted to be ever present. How do we get that out of the drawer in the kitchen? We need to make it relevant for the life today. It needs to be a size that's relevant so they know that they're putting their savings inside an environment that's relevant to them, that they're moving their business with certainty because the guarantees of this product, and it needs to be in front of them at all times. So the wealth scorecard is our effort to curate after going to all kinds of masterminds and buying all kinds of courses and put a thoughtful process, a thoughtful framework where we say, okay, if you were to organize elements on how to build wealth, where would you position those and how would you organize them so the message is cohesive, is understandable for most people? And we've, first of all, created this triangle, the wealth pyramid. And we set at the foundation at the bottom of this pyramid, if anyone listening can imagine this, there's three simple things we tell people. If you're starting at zero and you want to learn about money and you want to start building wealth, focus on these three things: financial education, get your ideas upgraded from where your ideas are about money. The most important part of money is what's happening between your left and right temple. Second, strengthen your financial awareness. You should have a budget that you constantly review every month so you know where money's going. You should know what your balance sheet looks like, what assets do you own, what liabilities do you have, and make it a full contact sport. Be engaged with that because money is a relationship you cannot outsource. You wouldn't send your kids 18 years to a different country and expect to have a strong relationship with them when they come back. Money has the same type of expectations. Money wants to be your friend and your relationship, a close relationship. Be aware of the world around you. The third component of this is when you and I come in place, which is, do you have a thoughtful saving strategy? Because for everything else you're going to do in your financial life, the first principle should be that for everything you earn, you should keep a portion of that. That is a phrase that has been in books that are much older than you and I, and there's wisdom on that. So, do you have a proper saving strategy? And now, with the infinite banking concept process, do you have a thoughtful process on where to permanently control those dollars for the rest of your life and hopefully multi-generationally, like you and I are doing with our families? That simple foundation is what expresses a really strong base, is how we think about it, to ultimately at the top of that pyramid create freedom, whatever freedom looks like to you. Every one of us has a different version of that, and we just need to get clearer and clearer about what that looks like. And in between, it has all the other elements we think are important. At the bottom, foundationally, we think that you should transfer risk away through personal insurance, like disability, um, like life insurance, like long-term care, and also the type of insurance that you need to have for property and casualty, home insurance, car insurance, etc. Your debt strategy needs to be properly managed, your estate plan, your entity structure and tax strategy. All these are elements of a foundation. And at the top, we call this wealth acceleration. Everyone needs the same foundation. At Acceleration, we need to make sure that our strategy for cash flow management, investing, and freedom aligns with our values, our lifestyle, our interest, our prophecy of life, right? And that's why your investing strategy, Jeremiah, will never look like mine because we're two different humans. We're unique, and it should be aligned with yourself, with your values. So that simple triangle I'm describing with all those elements, and I know I mentioned a lot of things, is now expressed into a wealth scorecard that gives you section by section thoughtful questions that you can take to state planning attorney, tax strategist, a PNC insurance carrier. Thoughtful questions to help you understand what kind of protections you need, what kind of risk transfer you do you need, how to have better conversations with the professionals in your life that will become your team, including your IBC strategist, including your life insurance professional. But it's a way for us to say, hey, score yourself in two categories. For every question, how much do you know about that question and how much have you implemented? Because the other thing here is it doesn't matter if you understand 115 of those questions to the nth degree if you are doing nothing. What we're trying to push our community is to take action. And it's a journey. We're not saying that they need to complete that in 2 months. We're saying that in the next 3 to 5 years is the expectation we set. Whatever you score today, we're going to make tangible improvements. Every year we take that test again, and the score continues to improve, particularly in the implementation. People underestimate the progress they can make in 5 years to create a strong financial life and financial future. The last thing I will say on that is If you ever want to get a hold of that, we share that with our community for free. This value that we want to give them, usually it's a $2,000 product. We share with our community for free because we are invested in bringing that value to others. It is taking us thousands of dollars in years to curate that for our culture, for our values. And I'm so glad to hear that you're using it with your community as well.
Yes. Hopefully, we'll be able to link to that opportunity to have a conversation just below if you're watching this on YouTube and that experience. All right, David, we love it. Thank you. So here's the question. You've mentioned a couple times that you were able to be in the room with us. We spoke this year. It was our second opportunity to be with the practitioners of the Nelson Nash Institute. We went out to Vegas area and we got up on stage and we talked about our why, people might call it, our mission, and our value system, what brought us here, and that type of story with people who are already in the choir, as we say, right? We're preaching to the choir, so we told them a little something, and we call our new keynote experience that my brother and I do together the Financial Freedom Fighters. And we also, father figures. We talked about our families. We talked about our kids, and you're a dad as well. And here's what I heard from you right as we stepped off stage. Actually, you were standing up in the corner, and you came up to me and you mentioned one or two things. I've heard you, and I realized that even on this podcast, you mentioned people in your extended family outside of the foundational four you got there. I'm using a lot of F words out there. Not that F word, just other F words. Okay. But what I know or assume that's missing a little bit from your life is we talked about, what, part of the reason we're here, Jonah, JDew, we're here because of what Dad wasn't able to pass down to us. And we tell that story in our keynote experience because his dad wasn't there to pass it down and his dad wasn't there to pass it down. We talk a little bit about why we're here for our families, even at home. But I noticed you mentioned your little brother. I got a little brother. You mentioned your dad-in-law, but you didn't mention your dad. So the reason that I bring that up, not to embarrass anybody or something, I hope your dad and you have a great relationship on a personal level.
Yeah.
But my question is like, hey, what is the conversation you're having with your family? So many people out there who's starting to catch on, who listen to you, listen to me, they don't know how to express this information to their family members. And they don't know how to have that conversation. It gets awkward. It gets weird. We didn't grow up with stuff like this. So I think I found something, and I don't know how to have this conversation. And I tell people all the time, I hope my brothers listen to this as well. And they said, man, you and your brother are doing something great, and it's awesome. I said, no. It's me and my brother. But I have two. And there's only two of us on this stage. There's only two of us helping people and coaching. I have two brothers. The job is not done. There's three of us. There's not two. There's three of us. And only two of us are here so far. So talk a little bit about that, David. Tell us about your family. Tell us about the conversations you're having. And maybe encourage people out there who are trying to catch on beginning this journey, but like, man, my family just doesn't see it.
Yeah. I have a few thoughts on this. Thank you for asking. And I'm an open book, so I don't think it's actually a personal question or anything. I love that we can bring this context because this is when people relate. This is when things get real, right? This is not just when we talk about a book. This is you and I actually sharing as men, as family leaders, as sons, brothers, what people can actually relate to. And I'll tell you, from watching your presentation, one of the things that actually connected to me the most is that you were able to share something so personal about your history, but you were uniquely you in how you expressed that. You brought Martin Luther King in your artistic ability to be a public speaker and bring passion to that conversation, connected with your family, bring humor. It was electric the way you connected with people. I think that from stage you probably could feel that. And I bring that up because what I've come to learn about this whole journey is that the most effective I can be is being myself. I cannot be Jeremiah. I could not get up there and repeat the words from Dr. King like you did. That was amazing. But I don't have to either, right? I can find in me my message that owning that perspective will touch other people. And I have this spiritual coach. I have several coaches in my life. I have a spiritual coach that's constantly reminding me, it's not you, David, it's God's plan. You're an instrument of creation for God. And the moment you realize that you need to look up at him to let the light pass through you so others can see it, you'll realize that is a cooperation with God. And that level of faith has changed the way I think about it. So, my family, you know, I have a very personal story with death in my family, which I think it's what opened me so early to be willing to think about life insurance. My mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer when I was 13 years old. My brother was 7 years old, and she fought for 2 years, 22 chemotherapies, multiple surgeries. She was in remission, and a couple months later, she went back to the hospital and passed away fairly quickly. And we didn't get much of a goodbye after celebrating her remission. I was 15 years old. My brother was 9. And I was lucky enough that my dad was the breadwinner in our home. My dad was there, he was present. My dad is a wonderful man. He's a quantum mechanics professor. So he's a very smart man, PhD, multiple masters. Our conversation at home was get the most education you can, get a great job, get a great income, and support your family, be responsible with your bills, which is not bad advice. But there was no more to give. There was not a conversation about wealth, about freedom, about abundance. Although my dad is a very generous individual, he helps his family, he helps people, has a huge heart. So I took all the great things he put in me, and I just wanted to advance that ball. In my family, funny enough, I don't know if you knew this, but statistically, globally, less than 3% of families are able to promote wealth 3 generations or more. Less than 3% of families. My grandmother was the daughter of a gentleman in Colombia that was very wealthy, had a lot of property, and she was born in a home where they owned the entire block or multiple blocks around, and she died renting in one of those properties. Okay. So I come from that level of history. These things happen with my mom, and the result is, well, thankfully, we weren't poor because my dad was a breadwinner. But what that also meant is that my dad had to go to work on Monday. I took my brother to school. And for the next 20 years, we never dealt with what had happened to us. We didn't have the space to mourn because there was no life insurance and death benefit. This is one of the things that when people tell me, I don't care about the death benefit, I just care about the cash value. I know that statement comes from a misunderstanding of the relationship of these two things. But more importantly, I think there's a deeper misunderstanding about the value of these things in someone's life in the long term and those that are impacted by that around that. So we don't deal with that for 20 years. And funny enough, Jeremiah, in my 30s, as I become a parent, my dad, my brother, and I, as adult men, sit around and talk about this and cry and start processing. And I get calls from my brother now having memories that we haven't talked about for 20 years. There's a price to how that affected me for 20 years in my 20s and 30s. And I don't know how to put that in my balance sheet, in my liabilities, but it's very real. So it's given me a significant amount of passion to put my life insurance professional hat and explain to people the value of an asset class that's uniquely positioned in our economy to protect human capital and financial capital. Is the only asset in the world that will create an instant amount of capital when somebody dies to be able to recover that loss. I don't know how to say this loud enough, but I hope people can hear what I'm saying there because it's really valuable. So it's part of my history. And I take this, my dad had dreamed about coming to the United States since 1970. We applied to be immigrants and immigrate with a green card in 1991. 9/11 happened in 2001. It delayed our process. We don't come to the United States until 2006. We became citizens in 2014. 44-year journey for my dad to become an American citizen. And I know how hard that was and how much effort it required. So now my only desire was to take the good things my dad put in me and my brother and advance that for the next generation, adding more knowledge about how do we build more prosperity, how do we give more to the community, how do we become a better version with the great ground that my dad and my mom put in us. Um, they couldn't talk about wealth because they didn't have that conversation themselves, and you can only give what you have. So that is the way my motivation to become obsessed with understanding how the money game actually works, to learn from other mentors that are ahead of the road, from other community members like yourself that understand how this works so I can be better at my game. And I think that's a never ending journey. There's no destination, there's no arrival syndrome in me for this.
Okay, David, man, powerful story. No, I didn't know that. And I look forward to hearing your expression of that on stage one day. That right there is the stuff that once we understand the concept, I got myself a policy or two or three or this company or that company or dividend scale. Man, though getting inside the why and the how and the who is speaking to you and where they're coming from is really what we tried to get across. But man, I appreciate you sharing that story of your own journey. So many folks out there, including folks who are like you in terms of, well, I'm an engineer, I'm a numbers guy. Let's talk about exponential functions like those calculators from high school. But then they talk about mom and they talk about dad, and that changes everything, man. So I appreciate that. Thank you for that. And I look forward to that full story. If it already exists, you got to share it with me. I want to watch it. Absolutely. I want to see it. But if it doesn't exist yet, I'm looking forward to that keynote experience at next year's. I'm going to nominate you. I want you on stage telling that story, my man.
Gave a lot of game, we never got a lot of things. Bow your head and say the prayer. We taught you how to be the bank.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation between JDew of the Banking Bros of the Cash Compound and Mr. David Zapata of Factum Financial, a fellow Nelson Nash Institute practitioner. If you want more information dealing and working with these guys and understanding the concepts between becoming your own banker, go ahead and follow. Maybe, subscribe or click the link and let's talk soon.